Imagine a world where more women had the time to develop their genius. Welcome to She Rebel Radio, a community-driven podcast dedicated to supporting women to unlearn conventional rules and create their businesses of significance. This is our Feminine Power series with our headline partners NatWest. NatWest has been a pioneer in supporting women in business since the publication of the Rose Review. My name is Lulu Minns. I host retreats and create spaces for women leaders to explore their genius. And today I'm going to create that same space for you right here on this podcast episode. Welcome to episode 103 of She Rebel Radio, My Magical Power with Geraldine Beskin. Geraldine, along with her daughter Barley Beskin, are the co-owners of the Atlantis bookshop on Museum Street in Bloomsbury, London. The Atlantis bookshop was founded 100 years ago in 1922 by magicians for magicians. It is the birthplace for modern witchcraft, where regular coven meetings were held in the basement. Geraldine and Barley are second and third generation booksellers, as Geraldine's father ran the shop when she was growing up. Geraldine herself represents the living history of magic, whereby her grandmother and mother were also both healers and fortune tellers, passing down their gifts. She speaks regularly on esotericism and is a social historian. The shop itself is seeping in history and is a must when you're next in London. Geraldine, I was super happy to meet you back in the summer when I stumbled upon the shop in the area where my father also grew up. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well indeed, thank you. And I'm delighted to be on your podcast, especially on such an auspicious day as Halloween. It's rather fun.
Yes, definitely. And I feel like we were meant to have a conversation when I came into the shop back in the summer.
Yeah, it's part of that knowing who you can communicate with thing, isn't it? Sometimes there just isn't a barrier between people. Somehow
No.
Get it from the very beginning, and it's nice. It's good. So
Yes.
thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. And I think, a few people that we've got in this particular series are people that I've just met kind of along the way and allowing the unfolding of stories to be told. So Atlantis was established 100 years ago in 1922. Who by and what was the purpose?
It was started by a young Jewish immigrant called Michael Hurwitz. And he and his friends were interested in the esoteric stuff, and they quite what motivated them, I don't know. They started off with a bookstall, and then they grew into a little shop, and so it went on. Mm-hmm. And he was a poet, and he knew Tolkien, and he knew Yeats, and he knew everybody else, because so few places then gave you access to books on the esoteric, and that was his driving force in his life. And so eventually he got a shop, and then Atlantis moved around a few times and then settled in Museum Street in 1939 because it'd been bombed out of the previous place.
Obviously the war over that time.
So we're as old as the BBC, which is kind of weird, but it's a great thrill this year. It's been a year of celebration for us. We've had happy hearts to have achieved it. During COVID, we thought, shall we just stop? Because my daughter's got a young child and, I'm getting oldish. And we could have thought, well, this is an elegant way of just stopping. And actually, it made us both more clearly ambitious for the shop. And so we decided onwards, and we were determined then to do the 100 years. This year has been fantastic, and so we're very well set for our next 100 years as far as we're concerned.
Oh, beautiful. Yes, putting in the foundation. And I love a couple of things there. Is one that the purpose was to improve access to esotericism, and starting with market stalls, because I think I said to you when I came into the shop, I grew up in a record shop, and my parents started with market stalls when we were very young, and then went to a secondhand shop and then a new shop, which I'm currently sitting in actually, because now we converted that to a flat. So it's the evolution of these things. So have you had what kind of celebrations have you had for your 100-year birthday this year?
We had a party in the spring, and we had nearly 100 people came to it actually, which was lovely.
Amazing.
And we've had bits and pieces of publicity, and we've intended to publish various bits and pieces, and we've only managed to publish one book so far, which is the Britannic Myths, which has been superbly illustrated by Joe Machine, and it's who's internationally collected and has become a bit of a mate of ours. But we've got other things in the pipeline, but they're for our 101th year, because it's been a boom year in the West End this year, with so many people, because of COVID, had holidays and hotels and flights booked, that those vouchers have got to be used up. And so they all seemingly all come to London, and it's been hectic, and we're not complaining at all, but the celebratory bits have been slightly put on hold because we just ran out of time. So more next year.
Yeah, it had. I've been up to London a good few times this year, because I think over COVID is the longest period that I've not been up to London. And yeah, it had a real buzz around town, which was really, really great to see. And I realised how much I'd missed it.
Yes. No, it is lovely just having to push your way through crowds again, really.
Yeah. How we've missed that. So how were women and, higher priestesses introduced into the work at Atlantis? We've heard it was established by a guy. Were men more powerful and authoritative in the world of magic at that time?
Well, it's hard to say for sure, but you still had groups like various iterations of the Golden Dawn, which was started in 1888. And that had men and women working together as equals in that. The Theosophical Society was started in 1875. And that certainly was started by women, run by women, and relied on women very heavily for the lecture circuit that they had and so on. So I think women have always found their way within the esoteric. And then Michael ran the Order of the Hidden Masters, which was a correspondence course type thing. So I've no idea about the membership of that, but I would suggest that there were women involved too. But then his great thing was that witchcraft was illegal in England until 1951. And post-war, he allowed the witchcraft revival through Gerald Gardner. He allowed Gerald Gardner's coven to meet in the basement of the Atlantis bookshop. Now, that was a risky thing to do, but certainly women were massively important in the rebuilding of witchcraft. And those early priestesses of Gerald Gardner's have used the shop until they died. So yeah, women were massively, massively important in that. And then because we've always sold tarot cards and books on spiritualism, things like that, then again, that's very much a women's province to that extent. Men, within the orders and within the covens and so on, it's a meeting of equals, and it's a case of who's better at the job does the job. So, women haven't been stood down. Again, it's arguable in the 70s if Alex and Maxine Sanders hadn't been, naked except for full Egyptian makeup and in the Sunday papers every week, that witchcraft would have faded away again. But Maxine was 6 foot tall, a peroxide blonde, and very good looking indeed. So the women have dominated the esoteric in my lifetime, certainly.
Yeah. And would you say even now that the majority of your customers are women?
It's much more 50-50 than it used to be. We used to get a lot of men in who were interested in witchcraft because they thought that they would be able to see naked ladies for the first time in their lives. Those men have largely, fairly much completely faded away now. Everybody's much more grown up about sex, the whole availability of sex, and so on has changed that. And so it's we always did have plenty of women in, and now I would say it's 50-50 really.
Yeah, interesting. And that shift and how that connects with other pieces of social history. And thank you for sharing. I don't think I knew that date, actually, that 1951 was when, witchcraft was no longer illegal, which wasn't that long ago. And I think, lots of people think that witch trials, for example, are part of ancient history and not actually modern history. which it is. So, as you said, the meetings and work at Atlantis, as they began, there were fears around doing that because it was actually illegal what was happening at that time.
Oh yeah, and also because see, James I of Scotland, sixth of England, or the other way around rather. He came from a dysfunctional family. His mother, Mary Queen of Scots, was in prison, and his father was murdered. So he didn't have a happy childhood.
No.
He then grew up hating the Catholics, and because they have objects that they venerated, and so do witches, that he said that we were idolaters. But then, because a witch told him reputedly exactly what he'd said to his wife on his wedding night, he particularly disliked them, and he set up the witch trials. But he was a weird one. He used to sit in on the witch trials. He wrote a book called Demonolatry, and when he became King of England, he made sure that it was kept in print in England as well as in Scotland. And that faded away then. The witches faded away, the persecution stopped eventually. But then during the war, there was a medium who wasn't a witch, but was called a witch, called Helen Duncan. And she was so accurate in her predictions, in what she was getting through, that there was a big, instead of being fined locally for taking money under false pretenses or something, it ended up in the High Court. And there was a real to-do about it. But it put the idea and the word witchcraft back in people's minds. And so Gardner having his coven in the shop, it was very, very risky indeed, because he could have been prosecuted. It was, because she had been falsely. But, the shop could have been closed down. It could have been a very tricky time.
Yeah, definitely. And it was James I, was it? He's come up in so many books that I've read about witch trials and things over the years. Him keeping demonology in print, was that to keep it in the forefront of people's minds of the risk that magic and witches can face, can pose, was the work he did.
And it was just he was an oddball basically, and hundreds and thousands of people suffered death by hanging or burning, and vilification and having fingers put, classic witch hunt stuff in little villages and things. It was inexcusable.
And extending out into Europe as well, wasn't it? How he did that.
Yeah.
His kind of blueprint, as it were, to extend that work out. So much history. So you grew up in the bookshop, which was run by your father at the time. Who did you meet, and what were some of your fondest or funnest experiences? I know for me, I met many incredible musicians growing up in a bookshop. So in a record shop, I'd love to hear your experiences in a magic bookshop.
The people then seemed to be so old and so mysterious, because I was a school kid. And, somebody in their 40s seemed old to me then. And they had conversations with my dad that I just hadn't got a clue what on earth was just being said. And they took all afternoon about it, and it just went on and on and on and on and on. So we often used to leave and just go up to the museum and look at the mummies. And there was a joke shop in Great Russell Street opposite the museum at the time. And we used to go and buy blackface soap and cameras where a snake would jump out when you press the button and things like that, and these terrible little tricks we used to buy, and we thought they were marvelous. So I couldn't tell you who I actually met, but I did see Gerald Gardner there one day when he and Dad came upstairs. They'd been having a meeting downstairs, and they were just laughing together, and Dad saw Gerald out, and I didn't get introduced, but I did see him. And as far as I know, there's one of his priestesses who's in her 90s, and then there's me, and we're the only people left who actually saw Gerald Gardner. So I missed people like Aleister Crowley and Austin Spare, but I did know people like Doreen Valiente, who was a very good witch. She was one of his priestesses, and she gave the grace and the poetry and the elegance to the witchcraft rituals that people use. And there have been many, many funny times and many sad times. I mean, we hug our customers, we cry with them, we share their joys. We shut for a week this year to go to a customer's wedding in Ireland, because Irish weddings take a long time to get done, as we all know. drink is taken and riotous times are had. So so no, it's the humor is immediate and fun, and all sorts of distinguished people come into us, but we only talk about our dead customers, not our live ones, really. Because they deserve their privacy. But yeah, it's one of the nice things about a shop, as you know, that you never know what's going to happen any day.
No.
It's you can have your day planned in your head, and then an email comes in and somebody needs help or whatever happens. You know, it's at the moment I'm buying a house full of books, for instance. That was an email that changed things. Of course, they're not in London or anything neat and tidy. And the customer was a lovely, lovely, lovely man. And it's a privilege to, you know, we've bought big collections before, but I've never bought literally a house full of books before.
No, and it's that real, I think, you know, shops of this kind of nature, similar, you know, growing up in a record shop, it really creates a sense of community.
Yes.
And I think you've got on your website that, you know, your customers are friends, as you said. You've gone to their weddings and you really get to know people.
Yeah, and also we have events, you know, whether it's an evening with ... a particular author, or whether it's a workshop or a book launch, or I mean, we don't do it very often, but this Saturday, for instance, we've got a party. It's somebody wants it in our shop because they're a dear friend of ours and they're a loyal customer to the shop, and it'll be an absolute pleasure to do it.
Yeah,
it's nice, that sort of thing, being accommodating to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they've written an enormous number of books. You know, they have been the backbone of spreading knowledge for about 40 years now, and that's in turn to be honoured, really, not just a birthday, but what they've achieved during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And was it Doreen you mentioned that brought grace and elegance and poetry to?
Yeah, Doreen Valiente. She lived in Brighton.
Oh, there you go.
There's a plaque put up on the block of flats where she lived. And of course, I've completely forgotten the address.
I know. I was going to say, oh, where is it?
No,
I'll look that up.
Yeah, but she, you know, she lived very modestly. She was a very quiet lady in lots of ways, but partly because she'd worked at Bletchley Park. And I mean, she could have been the tea girl, but we have no idea how important her job was or wasn't at Bletchley, but she certainly worked there. And as I say, she got involved with Gerald Gardner, and it just made sense to her. And she's become a bit of a sort of a poster girl for witchcraft, really, now. And she would have hated it because she was a quiet, modest woman. But actually, I'm very proud of the fact that there was somebody of her caliber who is worth saying this woman and her books and her teachings are excellent, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's good, clean stuff.
And how long is your family history of magic and healing, especially along the female line from your grandmother and your mother? And why is this work traditionally passed down the feminine line? Do we as women have a propensity to be better at working with the unknown and the unseen?
I don't know if we do have, but our world still, even though we go out to work, our world still let us talk about the fact that we have, we're more subtly attuned somehow. We read the cues. Our language is different. Our language structures are different to men. The way we assess people and situations we're not as oblivious of stuff as men are. And I think that helps us being healers, that the door is always slightly open to us with anybody, whereas with men, they just walk on by, they don't look, they don't think, you know. Some men are fantastic at it, and that's their skill. And I don't know that it has anything to do with sexuality or gender, or it's probably more to do with upbringing. And some people have got the touch, really. And other people have it and don't think that they have. They think that it's obvious. Well, it
Yeah.
is obvious, but how they got to that point of it being obvious is not normally recordable, if that makes sense. It just is common sense to them, but they're using their finer senses to get to there.
Yeah, because we only know what we know, don't we? We kind of only know what our experience is, and you kind of think, oh, can't everyone do that or feel that or understand that? And they don't, because they haven't got that subtlety or particular sensitivity, as it were.
No, and you know, so many men still have to wear suits, and you know, they can't say, I've got a feeling, or you know, oh, go home, you've got a headache, you know, when you haven't said you've got a headache, but they just know it. They have to wait to be let into it somehow, whereas women will leap straight into the situation more.
Absolutely. So how did your grandmother and mother pass down their healing and magical?
Well, I loved my nan. I was her chosen one to that extent, really. I was the eldest girl, and she and I just made a connection. And she made me wait until I was 9 to teach me how to use the playing cards. But she was a nice Irish Catholic lady, but she always used to have odd neighbours who would come along and, well, they've got a bit of a problem, so we'll just get the cards out, and I know it's silly, but we'll just see if we can make any sense from it at all. And she could also heal people and animals, and most people can heal one or the other, but Nanny could do both. I'm not good with people. I'm a bit better with animals, but physical healing isn't me. Talking with people and getting people, if that makes sense, is much more where I'm at. Whereas my daughter, she can heal. Her hands just get like a radiator or a hot water bottle. They're amazing.
Yeah.
She has the touch, without a doubt. I lack that, really.
And when you said the playing cards, do you mean tarot cards, oracle cards?
No, they were playing cards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And even now, if I can't bully the tarot into giving me the answer I want, I will completely unscrupulously, I will resort to playing cards, and they still won't tell me true. They still won't give me the answer I want, and I have to glumly accept that I'm barking up the wrong tree.
And you keep picking the same one, and it's not
what yeah, but I like the way cards move of any description. You know, that some move like silk, some are clunky, some decks, they're so beautiful that I may lay a proper reading out, but I find each card has got so much depth and so many symbolism. Is just such a beautiful thing that just one of them will jump out at me, and that's the one that gives me the answer and that I work with. I use that as a visual meditation, as it were. And that's just, you know, it's just the way of it. Other decks work fast. Other decks, it's like sitting down with a nice cup of tea and a biscuit, that you've just got the time to work it through with these. They're lovely. I love them.
And I would say, you know, a big recommendation to anyone listening, you know, if you don't use cards and you want to, or you do, because a lot of ladies that I work with, because I use them, you know, say to me, oh, you know, what have you got? I'll get what you've got. And I'm like, they pick you, which is why I massively recommend going into a shop and choosing them, because if you order them online, it's just not the same. I've done that and I'm not connected to them. But when I've gone into a shop and I've just been drawn to a particular pack, they're the ones that I have a real deep connection with.
I do genuinely feel that seeing a pack of cards on a shelf, if you do it the other way around and you buy them online, it's a bit like buying a pair of shoes without trying them on.
Yeah.
Whereas if you see a deck on a shelf, there's just something about it that you just feel, it just feels different to the other ones on the shelf, and you're just more attracted to it. And that's really nice. They do kind of choose you. And the whole thing of being gifted your first pack of tarot cards, it's really nice if somebody wants to buy them for you. But you wouldn't necessarily like a t-shirt that they bought for you, or a scarf. And so don't be lumbered with a deck of cards you don't like. You know, buy your own, make your own mind up. It's a charming thing, but it puts all sorts of stress on all sorts of people doing it that way. And it's just one of these sort of urban charming nonsenses that's been around since forever, but that you don't need to do it. And it's a sign of your own independence and that intuitive sense that you need in life anyway.
Yeah, it's learning to trust that, isn't it? And I think the cards are so good for people anyway, but on that journey. And it's the same with stones and things like that. I think people can get really caught up in what they mean, but it's what it means to you and the intention that you set around it.
Yeah.
Which is really powerful. But what I did have very powerfully, one of my clients, American client, a good few years ago, had a channeled message for me to buy a particular deck of cards. And I didn't buy them for about a year. I then did, and I used them all the time. In fact, if I attend retreats without them, for clients of ours that, you know, attend quite frequently, they're like, why haven't you got that deck? What do you mean? You know, so that was a great, but she didn't buy them for me. She just said, I've had a message for you. You should get this deck. And that was really, really powerful.
And that's really different, and that's really very, very good. I like that story very much indeed.
Yeah. In fact, they're propping up my computer at the moment, keeping it up high. So I met you when the Feminine Power Divine to Demonic exhibition was on up the road at the British Museum. Totally relevant to the work you do at Atlantis and our UK history. Yet you were not contacted by them. And for me, you just mentioned that your grandmother was Irish. The more Celtic pagan history we have here was kind of missing from a very global perspective at the museum. I wondered if, you know, do we still carry that witch wound and hide our history here in the UK, do you think? And what might that knock-on effect for us as women, you know, be in using, and men, any additional powers that we may have?
Well, I have high hopes of it all becoming extraordinarily normal, because the Harry Potter generation, which is global, you know, J.K. Rowling made the world literate again. There's a whole generation of kids and their parents and grandparents, actually, who read books with no pictures in them except the ones in their heads. And they devoured them, and they made the kids literate. And then on top of that, the subject matter was magic. And so those people are growing up with an expectation of symbols meaning something, reliability, depending on friends, knowing that there are wrong uns in the world and that you should not let them bully, or, you know, you should somehow defeat them if you possibly can. Those noble things were instilled in a generation from very, very young. And I like the idea that it is becoming absolutely commonplace to have an interest in the esoteric, in however slightly. When I was in my 20s, people thought I was absolutely raving mad because I would have candlelit baths with herbs in. Look at the figures on the candle world. You know, everybody uses candles. Everybody enjoys candles, you know, even men, as it were. And I think that is an absolutely primeval thing. For the last 30 odd years, houses have been built without fires, and we are hardwired to need the protection of flame. Since we lived in caves, before we lived in caves, we've had fires, and we need that, the purity of nothing being able to live in the flame. It cauterizes things variously, it fascinates, it hypnotizes. Our human need is for candles is not just in the pagan world, it's throughout everybody now.
It's a balance of elements, isn't it? It's earth, fire, wind, water. We need all
air
of
and water.
And I think I've heard through the grapevine over the years that I think even Donald Trump gets people to feng shui his buildings. I don't know if that's true, but and he won't buy
feng shui him.
I know that may be beyond someone's powers, but I was like, that's fascinating. You know, from a very patriarchal business man perspective, you know, that you know, some very powerful people have those kind of secrets that, you know, people just poo-poo. I don't know if it's true, but I thought it was interesting if it was.
Yeah, well, I like the idea that he does, because he'll use anything that he thinks might work. You know, that opportunist thing in him, you know, probably he does have that done, I would think.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think all of us have magic and psychic powers. In recent years, I've discovered I'm clairsentient, and I didn't even know what that meant, but it made total sense to me. And I even used that ability when I was a lawyer. How does that differ from being clairvoyant, for example? And what would the first steps be for someone discovering more of their magical powers?
Well, not everybody is everything. I tend to see it as, say there's, I don't know, 100 things that people can be good at. And then there, you can be good from 1 to 10 at it. We can't all be good at everything.
No.
And I think that certain things like being musical or artistic or able to do maths, it's acceptable in families that somehow runs through them. And it's not just socially, it's somehow they've got a propensity towards being able to do it. And I do think that there are psychic families. I do think that, excuse me.
That's okay.
What you can't do in one line of the 100 possible things you can do well, you can do something else well instead. You could be a psychic mountaineer, who can cook meat very well, but it's terrible at eggs. There's all sorts of ways that we can achieve. And as I say, I do think that some people were born with a bit of an innate ability to do this sort of stuff.
It makes sense, doesn't it? If we inherit, like, eye color, etc., that we inherit certain abilities, and I think they're even proving more and more some ancestral memories or traumas that we might carry through, but not really understand it, but feel it in some way.
Yeah. And it, and why do people pick up on atmospheres? Everybody accepts that going into a church, that it has an atmosphere. You go into a school or a hospital, they have a distinct atmosphere. You go into somewhere that is fantastically well decorated, it has an atmosphere. It suggests money, it suggests solidity, all these not quite tangible things to us. And really, it's pots of paint that have done that. But it's the presentation, we pick up on it. And I think we all do respond in ways to that as well. And I mean, the clair just means clear. It's just part of, we got so much from the continent, and so many, Victorian middle-class people who were involved in all of this spoke French anyway, so they just adopted the French way of saying things. But clairsentient is it's the ability to pick up something when there are no facts available, but somehow it. And it's a bit different to clairsentient is when you hear something. It's not in the room, but you definitely hear it. Sometimes at the shop I smell things, and I get roses, nobody else can, whatever. I can just smell stuff. And one day I could smell this really fabulous smell, some expensive tobacco. It was brilliant. Turned out to be a man sitting at the cafe next door smoking a cigar. So check the real world first is my recommendation on all of this.
Yeah, my mum always says she has a very acute sense of smell that she can pick up anywhere. So clairsentient is a clear sense, isn't it? And clairvoyant is a clear vision. And then
that's it.
Clairaudient is a clear sound.
Yes.
So I mean, I'm deaf in one ear, so I definitely haven't got that one.
But we also have that spidey sense about us where we can sense danger.
Yeah.
And you don't know why, and you don't know how, but you just know there is something afoot. And you need to just go around a different corner or step back because there's a car's going to come up the pavement or whatever it's going to be. We've all had that thing that makes it's not even the hair going back on standing up on the back of our heads. We just have this intuitive sense to get out of there kind of idea.
Yeah.
And talk to any serviceman, they'll tell you they've got it. They just know. They just absolutely know. They don't know what will happen, but they know something that they don't want to happen will happen.
Yeah, and same with animals as well, isn't it? My father was reading a letter from his grandfather the other day, which has only recently been found, and he was in which is incredible, First World War, on mules.
Hmm.
And he's written in there that if the mule wanted to change direction, always trust it, because they knew where a bomb or grenade was going to land way before it actually did.
Yes.
Which is incredible, but we are all made of the same stuff. So I quite often say to people, if you trust the fact that we're all energy, as you were talking about, the energy of spaces, for example, I always find it fascinating, like where churches were built, why they were built in particular spaces by our ancestors is very interesting.
Yes, and very often they were built near water, which is sort of ignored, really. But that it makes perfect sense. People went there to get their water. They met there. It was an automatic meeting place kind of idea. But no, in life, I don't live by many rules, but I do live by instinct first, reason second.
Yes, same as me. And it's fine. Other people, it's the other way around, but do have some of it.
Yes, you need it. You need it. It's the instinct that will get you out of trouble.
Yeah, every time.
Reason will stop you repeating the trouble.
Yeah, so use both and use them wisely, definitely.
Yes.
So you and your daughter Barley bought back the shop a few years ago. Why was that? And do you consider that now we're in a world in crisis, it could be a really important time that we as humans connect back with alternative ways of being, which are beyond our physiological and psychological understandings? And what would you say to skeptical people?
I think that skeptical people are incredibly lazy. I think it's jolly rude to go through life just saying, I don't believe it to be true, therefore it is not true, to almost anything that they can't be bothered to investigate, or they investigate to disprove absolutely everything. I think, as I say, I think they're no more than, sort of sixth form debaters, who are too clever by half, amuse themselves but not usually anybody else, and they're a type and they're fixed. And I don't think any of us can afford to go through life with fixed opinions on anything.
No, it's
and their absolutely blinkered view of life, I think, is extraordinarily limiting, and it's a pity. So I don't have much truck with skeptics, I'm afraid.
Don't blame me. And I was going to say, it's incredibly boring, isn't it, to think you know the answers to everything?
Yeah, and it's usually, sort of Googled information, Googled answers that they've got anyway, but don't try telling them that, they get really upset. I think that what we're finding is that because of COVID, people went walking and they learnt the names of the trees in their local streets. And they thought, blimey, this is embarrassing. I've lived here 10 years and I still didn't know that was a plane tree kind of idea. But from that, they've got bikes, they've gone further, wild swimming, all those sorts of things. And from that rediscovery of nature, the nurturing sense of nature has, and our need to look after the world is turning people into pagans, much to their genuine surprise. And they're beginning to understand that there is a spiritual side to this as well. And there are these invisible lines that link us and that matter throughout the world. I like the fact that the Queen's lasting wish for the Commonwealth was to have a green canopy around the world that she'd had an involvement in. And that's very powerful and very, very spiritual and very, very, very important. And we've got to fight fracking. This is our earth that we're allowing to be abused by these people for money.
Yeah, it needs to be. I don't know if you've got the book. I'm sure you probably have. Blading Sweetgrass. It's about that reciprocal relationship that we have with the earth.
No, I don't know that one. Was it
Blading Sweetgrass? I can't remember the author. It's about the native indigenous tribes and their relationship with land. Incredibly good book. I only read it very recently, but she talks about a lot in that reciprocal relationship that we should have with land and other beings living on it, instead of just take. It's about what can we give.
Yes, because I was thinking of the railway cuttings, where the commuter trains go. So few of them went there during lockdown that those places have been able to repair and thrive. Even the places we don't see, we just pass them by, but they are the green lungs of our land. And it's not just about having vistas, it's not just about having fantastic views and being by the seaside. It's nurturing our inner cities as well.
Yeah.
And it's in these subtle ways that, please, even if we do it initially through our senses, we should get to a more satisfying life, however spiritual we want to call that, really.
Yeah, a more whole life. And,
yes.
And what did when you and your daughter restarted the business, what was the more linear, rational feedback on you rerunning the family business?
Well, how it happened is because we had sold the business about 10 years beforehand, and I hadn't been in there since, and my daughter was living out of town. I'd just come back to London, and we went into the shop to just have a look at it, see how things were. And we were taken aback at how appalling it was, is the truth of the matter. And the woman who ran it had run it into the ground, and I don't think she vacuumed the place since we left. Wow. And we were just so taken aback that we bought it back that afternoon. We were so indignant. Now, there was no logic to that. Barley was doing a second of her business degrees, and at college, everybody said, oh, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. You'll be working with your mother, and it's a very old business, and it's on its knees, and it's just terrible. You can't resurrect it. There's no point, and there's too much against it. And but Barley and I both knew that we were absolutely right. And I hadn't worked for 10 years. Barley was a student, but somehow there was no question about it. And as I say, we bought it back that afternoon, and we threw away everything. Bookcases, the stock was appalling. We got rid of all of that, and we started all over again. And the risk was that it was a very long established business with a very, very, very bad reputation. But what I discovered very quickly was I still had a very good reputation.
Yeah.
And this had all happened pre-Google, pre-internet, really, pre-everything. But people gossip, people talk. And within weeks, Geraldine's back, Geraldine's back. People came in to be nosy. And then they saw that, we were trying to get a handle on the place again, and they were supportive, and they supported us, they supported the shop, and we have built it and built it and built it ever since. And we have a worldwide clientele. At one stage we even had customers at North and South Pole, and however and we could never get them to meet, which would have been really rather fun, because Atlantis would have been the only place they should ever have met each other.
Yes, absolutely.
It would have been a hoot, that. But, and so, through hard work, but instinct first, reason second, we just did it. And it's been great. We've never regretted it for a quarter of a second.
Yeah, and it sounds like a real strong feeling, a real strong sense of purpose and needing to be back in that space, and really being guided by that. It's amazing to hear. And now, thriving with lots of different kind of pockets of the business. Thank you so much, Geraldine. We're going to have to wrap up because I could talk to you all day. But what is next for you, and what's next for Atlantis? Do tell us before we go.
Hopefully, another 100 years in various guises. Next year, we're hoping to do more publicity, more publishing, more events, sell more books, and get a proper website at long last, where people, can just click a button and buy things instead of having the long, laborious method that they have to if they want to buy anything online at the moment. So no, we're moving slowly into the 21st century, and looking forward to it very, very much.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. Thank you so much, Geraldine, for being with us on She Rebel Radio.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to She Rebel Radio. It's been an honour to support you taking the time to discover more of your genius, and we thank our partners NatWest for supporting this series. If you'd like to attend a retreat or work with me, please visit lulumins.com, and don't forget to join us in furthering the conversation on social media. Just search for NatWest Business or Lulumins in Google and on all social media platforms.